Okay, I think we're going to get started. So welcome to everybody who's joining us online today. I'm Tom Kachovic, and I'm just going to be the moderator.
Yes.
Our presenters today, we've got four individuals, all who are involved with business in China, and three are presenting information. The first will be Marvin Cunningham. Marvin is the president of Long-Stanton Asia. He's been in that role for 7 years. He lived in China for 5 years. He is located primarily in the United States now, though he still travels back to China. He'll be presenting today. He's also presented in the first three webinars that we did. From GBBN Architects, we have Matthew Shuttlecotty. He's the CEO and Director of Architecture. He's responsible for the creative culture that supports innovation and collaboration as the core to the company's design success. For the last 10 years, Matthew has focused on designing projects in the education and China market. As the CEO, he is guiding the firm's global operations, is responsible for the development of a globally relevant design production staff. Also with us is Herm Harrison. Herm is the Vice President of Foster Transformer Company. They're a Cincinnati, Ohio-based manufacturer of electronic transformers and power supplies, and they're entering their 75th year. He is currently overseeing the global sourcing, design engineering, and marketing for the company. He's responsible for establishing Foster's global manufacturing presence in 2001. Also with us is Pei Zhang. Pei is a attorney with Frost, Brown & Todd, and she is located in the Louisville office. She also has participated in the first three seminars. She deals primarily with China business and their China practice. Marvin, go ahead.
Well, everyone, welcome to Case Studies, local companies talking about how they're going to manage their businesses in China over the next 5 years. Before we get started, I'd like just one housekeeping thing. If everyone joining us online can please turn off their microphones, that way we get limited feedback, or if you get a cell phone call, the rest of us will not hear it. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. First, I just was going to go over very briefly what our previous seminars talked about. The first one was just a dissection of the current Chinese model, general business conditions, and different business models that seem to be working currently in China. Our second presentation mainly focused on the next 5-year plan, what the Chinese government says is going to happen, and what we think is really going to happen, and was followed by what this means to the U.S., opportunities and barriers, and where China's growth will come from in the future. And these are kind of the general themes overall, and we're going to see how that is actually put into practice by some local businesses here. So we're going to have case studies again from Foster Transformer, GBBN Architects, and Long-Stanton Asia. And with that, turn it over to Herm.
Good morning. As Tom indicated, I'm with Foster Transformer. We've been here in Cincinnati since 1937, and we've been active in Asia since 2001. I think we bring maybe a little bit different perspective than some of the other companies that have presented here and some of the other background information. Our really reason to be in China was to support our North American customers. We didn't see for our business an opportunity really to do business in China. Certainly, transformers are to a large extent a commodity, and where you do have innovation, the innovation is fairly easily replicated. So our interest really was being able to continue to serve our customers here in North America and be able to maintain a presence in the smaller product line, which typically is dominated by labor costs. Currently, we have about a 65% split between 65% produced here in Cincinnati, about 35% is produced in Shenzhen, China. And we've got a lead time here in our Cincinnati facility, typically runs 3 to 4 weeks. That was also typical in Shenzhen until recent years, about 3 to 4 weeks manufacturing. That's now moving out more like 6 to 8, at least for planning purposes. Quite a bit of issue, particularly around Chinese New Year, with employees returning to the factory and some delays there, not knowing how many people are going to come back, how many people you're going to have to recruit, how long it's going to take to get everybody up to speed. And then, of course, you also have the shipping concerns when you're bringing product back. So that's typically running right now about 44 days from the time it leaves the factory in China until the time it reaches our dock here. So that all has to be taken into consideration when you're planning the types of products that make sense to do in China, the types of products make sense to do here, and what your customers' planning and visibility actually is. One of the things that was kind of an obvious as we looked up until the yuan was allowed to float against the dollar and many other factors, pricing was pretty stable. So for our first 4 or 5 years there, really there was very little change in our cost of any of the product that we produced, and that was not untypical of what we saw here. Material costs were fairly flat, labor costs were fairly flat. In about 2005, you can see from the graph there was a pretty sharp trajectory up in price, and when Marvin asked me to present here, my initial thought, simply looking at that information, was, the writing's on the wall. There's only a limited amount of time where we're still going to be able to produce product in China and afford to bring it back here. It's related to the spiraling labor costs and so forth. So I dug into it a little bit more. I started to look at some of the underlying factors, and I could have presented this in many more graphs, but in the second slide, I found that following virtually the same trajectory was the loss of value of the dollar to the yuan. It's about 30% of the difference. So I thought, that's kind of interesting. If we go further, and I started looking at material inflation, that's really our third graph, and I subtracted that out, what I saw was, in reality, our cost structure, in spite of the increase in wages, was relatively flat. Took a little bit of a dip when the whole economy took a dip. Now it's on somewhat of an upward trajectory again. Some of that has to do with, again, wages going up. A lot of it has to do with the value of the dollar. The biggest difference that we've seen in our time there is simply the value of the dollar. That 30% was typically the type of margin that we could expect to maintain on product that we produced in China and still be able to bring it to market at a price that was attractive to our customers. So going forward, although labor is a concern and we're seeing some uptick there, productivity is mostly, to this point, is mostly masked the increase in labor costs. So a bigger concern for us going forward is going to be the stability of the dollar versus other global currencies, particularly the yuan. And while it's kind of a mixed blessing, it does allow us to bring some product back here because of that difference in the value of the currency. It also means that we have to be much more selective in the type of product that we try to produce in China, look at what percent of the cost is related to labor, what percent is related to materials, and what materials are involved. And so that's really been a big changing dynamic for us. We can probably move on here to the conclusion. I want to try to keep this, my part of it, brief. As I kind of highlighted, the exchange rate is the biggest factor affecting our ability to be competitive and bringing product back to the United States. The wage inflation isn't an immediate threat, although it's pushing our costs up. Typically, labor is about 10 to 15% of our product price, so it's not strictly driven by that. Although we've had double-digit increases in wages, we've also seen similar gains in productivity. There's still some wage disparity between Shenzhen, where we are, and some of the interior regions. Right now, it hasn't been effective for us looking to the interior because of the gap in productivity, but I see that having somewhat of a dampening effect as we continue to go forward on the continued wage increases. Also of concern, I think, is that at some point, China has to maintain a pretty healthy export market to be able to continue to grow their economy. So there's going to be many factors that are going to affect on, I think, what happens wages and costs going forward. But we have to be prepared for whatever that is, and a lot of it seems to be, outside our direct control in terms of pricing. So again, we just have to study the product closely, figure out what makes sense, and that changes. We could originally count on low wages fixing most sins. That's no longer the case, but there still are capabilities and material availability and so forth that make that will continue for the foreseeable future to make China an attractive place for us to do business. That really is pretty much it. So, manufacturing lead time, the type of product, those are all factors that we consider when we look at business. And then going forward, the exchange rate is going to be very critical as far as we're concerned.
All right. Thank you very much, Herm. We're going to go ahead and move on to our first poll question here. The U.S. dollar has lost 31% of its value against the RMB since 2004. How much value has the Canadian dollar lost versus the RMB during the same time period? And go ahead and put up the poll here, or
Maybe. Sure.
we're having a little bit of technical difficulty here. Just give us 1 second. Try this.
Marvin?
Yep.
Hi, this
Yes.
is Jenny Bodie. I think sound should be connected now. If we can, is
Okay.
anybody else still connected?
I'm on.
Yeah, we can hear the sound just fine. We were having an issue with the poll question here.
I will be right in.
Yeah, well, we'll come
Well,
back.
we'll go ahead and skip the actual polling here and give everyone the results. We have the answer here is A, 0. As it happens, from April 1st, 2004 to March 1st, 2012, the Canadian dollars changed. Looks like 1/10,000th of a penny against the RMB, which is pretty incredible. I looked it up myself after Harm told me just to make sure that was correct, but it is. During the same period of time, the Australian dollars actually gained 8% against the Chinese currency, while, of course, the U.S. has lost 31%. So take that as a fun fact and what you will, but it's certainly an interesting way of looking at devaluation and what it's kind of done to competitiveness here in the U.S. Moving right along, we're going to go ahead on to GBBN's portion of the event. Matthew?
Okay. Thank you. Good morning. You can go ahead and do the next slide. GBBN Architects is a service industry, and it's different, obviously, than manufacturing and how and why we entered China. But as a company, we're 53 years old, and we have offices in 4 different cities. Go to the next slide. There we go. We have offices in 4 different cities, Beijing, Cincinnati, Louisville, and Pittsburgh. We've been working in China since 2002. Our main areas of expertise are in healthcare, education, performing arts, and housing. Housing is how we entered the China market, and you'll see we are now doing quite a bit of healthcare work, and because of the implications of development of China, the 5-year plans, we're now doing and seeing more education and performing arts work that I'll touch on. Our sales as of last year and this year, 60% of our work is in the United States, 40% is in China, and our staff distribution, we have 40 staff in China and 80 in the United States. Go ahead to the next one. Important for the service industry to touch a little bit on some of the factors that have been going on in China over the last several years and see how they impact the architecture and design industry. Different figures related to the population growth or the population shift is particularly important to our industry as it relates to housing and to healthcare. The numbers, as everybody likes to look at, are always staggering when you look at the changing population, not only in the change in the aging population, the increase that we're seeing, which is over 40 million people, the shift from population from the rural to the urban that continues to change. But just since 2000, the shift has brought 195 million people into urban areas, which is great for architects that are designing housing and those that are trying to provide healthcare services. The areas around the shift in the age is also important to us as we look at the type of things that we're providing. And that we're seeing that the decline in the youth age as far as the percentage of the population and an increase in the age of the seniors. We're seeing a shift of distribution really of kind of a proportional change of about 86 million less youth than there were previously. in percentages. Obviously, the numbers, the gross numbers are increasing. And then again, as we look at the educated population, those that we're designing housing and building healthcare facilities for, the areas around the improved education and those moving into education is huge for us. And what we're seeing just since 2000, an increase of 112 million people that are now receiving a higher level of education, which again is just great for us as we look at opportunities as we move forward. But as we looked at the current 5-year plan and the last 5-year plan, there was a number of things that were implications to the statistics that we just had, and obviously major changes in urbanization, improved education, and then the increase in the aging population have all increased people's expectations of services as it relates to facilities. And specifically as we look at healthcare for us, as we've entered into healthcare, the level of services that the Chinese population is expecting is on par with the world. They're not looking for any type of lower level of services. And so the improved facilities becomes important for us. We see a lower tolerance in the Chinese for a decreased level of services, and we see a lot of shifting of medical professionals coming and being trained outside of China, going to China with expectations of that quality level of health care. So that's great for us. In regards to what's the government doing and how that's impacting us, because of the shift from rural to urban, in the last 5-year plan, there was more emphasis just in trying to get some facilities up and running. And that was important in the urban areas. And now they're seeing that there has become a disconnected relationship of what they're doing in the rural areas to the urban areas, and they're starting to refocus on trying to provide more services into the rural areas. And so that has started to open up more markets for us as we've looked at the opportunities within healthcare. In reality, when we looked at this year's 5-year plan, the government is not looking to invest any more RMB into the market than they were in the last 5-year. But we're seeing that there's some new things that they're doing that is going to help to accelerate their development. Some of it is a result of them needing to do it to keep up with their demand. And the major issue is around allowing private investment in healthcare. The government has been running healthcare and controlling it to a great degree, but in order to meet their demand, they now realize that they need to open themselves up and find other ways to bring healthcare into China. And so they're doing things around permitting private investment into healthcare facilities. Up to a third can be publicly funded, and that's not only internal dollars to China, but it's also opening it up for investments from foreign companies into healthcare. And then also making it easier for private healthcare to find opportunities and to open up operations in China becomes a big opportunity for us. The areas that we're seeing is that when we entered healthcare just barely 5 years ago, they were mostly all public institutions, and they were facilities that were one-stop in regards to that if you had a cold, you went to the same place as if you were going for any type of cancer treatment. Today, we're starting to see an increase in specialty hospitals, areas that are more focused on special care, starting to go out into the public, similar to what goes on in the United States, of bringing services out into it and not just having one centralized facility. And that creates a pretty big shift. So for us, as we look at what's the 5-year plan present for us, we see that it presents growth. Growth is because that the Chinese population is expecting higher quality in what they're receiving. The increased middle class is very important for an architecture firm because of what it creates for us in regards to increased demand. We're also seeing that because of the government's comfort level with external investment, that's actually going to help to accelerate the number of facilities that are going to be built over the next 5 years, and that's going to be positive for the building industry. And then the increase in private hospitals, and the relationship to private hospitals are for an international company working in China when a healthcare institution comes from the United States and is looking to do something in China, the opportunity for a foreign company to do that work is greater than a Chinese company. So as we see foreign investment going into China, and being a U.S. company and having and knowing U.S. Healthcare processes, that's also very supportive for us to have a good market position as they actually grow. We can jump to the next one. The second major area, and this is really our largest area of work that we do in China, is around community development work, and that's primarily around housing. And because of the market growth that's going on in housing, what we're seeing is a shift that's related to the market conditions, very similar to healthcare. And so obviously the increase in urbanization, the increase in people with education and dollars to spend becomes very important to us. And in order to deal with these changes, and our developers dealing with the changes, we're seeing a shift. When we entered in 2002, we did housing developments that would be anywhere from for 1,000 to 100,000 people. And they were single source housing developments with very little amount of retail involved in each one of them. But now we're seeing that developers are creating more mixed-use developments, including areas of more increase of office space, recreational facilities, retail, certainly, healthcare facilities in the development. All of this starts to help to improve our opportunities as we're a company that works in all of those areas, and that becomes important. This, while it's not specific to any one given 5-year plan, is certainly being driven by the forces of the government of trying to balance the luxury residential work that the developers have been doing and trying to get them to do housing and other facilities for a lot of this rural population as it comes into the urban areas that doesn't have the economic means to buy an expensive condominium. So that pressure from the government is part of what drives the developers' reactions to creating a more mixed-use development. So the other area we have been involved in as well, our office is positioned in Beijing. We actually cover the entire country of China, which is rather staggering in a U.S. process to where if we had the same thing and we were doing the same work in the United States, we would have offices in north of Maine, down in Miami, we'd be on the East Coast, and we'd be out to somewhere around Denver in order to service that. But we're servicing it right now from Beijing. But that was initiated because the work when we entered was around the first-tier cities. And now what we're seeing is a lot of growth, not only in the second-tier cities, but the satellites around the first-tier cities. And that effort has created a lot of opportunities for us. And we've seen an increase from just the housing work to starting to look back at the urban cores, developments of the central business districts of these cities, trying to draw and create opportunities for people as they are coming into the cities to not just be going to Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, but to go to the other cities has been important. So our opportunity has been around our ability to be flexible in providing not just housing, but areas of office work, of understanding and being a help on hotel work, and obviously within the retails as well. So the final area that our developer clients are seeing a big shift that they have to react to, and again, it's an indirect pressure from 5-year plans. And for a developer, when they see a 5-year plan, which is different than our healthcare client, the healthcare clients can look at a 5-year plan and create some type of a strategy for what that means to them. The developers become much more reactionary. They don't know totally what a 5-year plan means to them. It just starts to unfold. And so they become very reactionary, and that the changes happen throughout the entire process. One of the things that we get faced with in the developer market of them trying to control real estate costs and the escalating value of real estate is how they modify the structure to which developers can get money. Right now, they're shifting to make money very difficult for developers to get. And so, not unlike our conditions here in the United States, cash is king in China right now. And the companies, the larger companies that have money on hand and are able to finance the purchasing of their land from the government are much more equipped to kind of take advantage of the growth. We're also optimistic about the challenges the government have placed about creating more mixed-use developments, because we've already seen an increase in our opportunities around cultural facilities and educational facilities that are all important for these developments to actually survive and to be successful. And we're seeing that those that are having those components, not only are they making the government happier, but they are actually creating a more viable community that people are buying into. So the developers are very quickly seeing that providing these amenities is something that differentiates them from just a pure housing development. And I think that takes my part.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit here about Long-Stanton, Asia. Long-Stanton itself was founded in 1862. Started as a private mint about 10 blocks from where we're sitting right now. But we started our Chinese operations, at least looking for a place in 2004, and set up our Wolfie over there in 2005. We're primarily a manufacturer of metal parts and components for a wide range of industries. At any given time, we might be serving 35 to 40 different industries, so a little bit of everything. Of our manufacturing, about 85% of it's domestic and about 15% of it's in China. That does not include we have a joint venture that does rubber, but I'm kind of keeping this more on the metal side of stuff today. In China, our lead times average 4 to 5 weeks plus 30 to 40 days in shipping. And as Herm mentioned, it used to be a little bit quicker than that to ship, but especially with less container loads, it's been stretched out in the last I don't know, 6 months or so. I'm just going to dive right in here, and for me, unlike Herm, the biggest problem / opportunity I see in the next 5 years is labor. And I pulled some numbers from our old salary lists yesterday, and as you can see on here, in 2006, labor was 10% of our total expenses. And it was, not a rounding error, but it was not our major concern. We were much more concerned about the cost of equipment, shipping, other things of that nature. However, fast forward 2012, it's now 32% of our total expenses in China and growing at a relatively rapid pace. Some of this has to do with the product mix that we do, and some of it has to do with other factors as time's gone on. But I can see this being a continuing issue going forward for us. A little bit more information here in terms of skilled labor, and I set these all at 5 so it would graph nicely out to give you an idea, but this is based on our actual experience in China with actual employees. A welder has gone up basically from a level in 2006 of 5 up to a little bit over 18, so a little bit more than 3.5 times in the last 6 years. Production manager, not quite as dramatic, it's a little bit less than doubled. As you can see on here, quality manager as well has really gone up quite a bit in the last few years, almost tripled, or a little bit more than tripled, I'm sorry. And our general manager is a little bit more than twice as expensive as he was 6 years ago. From this, if I extrapolate it out through all the different types of employees we have, you'll see employees on the shop, and it was actually surprised me when I did it, employees on the shop floor, roughly speaking, are about 3 times more expensive than they were 6 years ago. People in the office, kind of general category for accountants and things of that nature, are about twice as expensive. And we're in a second-tier city, so that plays a little bit of a role in this. I think if you were in a Shanghai or Beijing, you would have more inflation on the manager side, the office worker side. But for us, this has been our experience, and certainly since on the shop floors where the money's made, it's something that we're keeping a constant eye on. What are we doing to manage this change? Basically, we've had several strategies over the last few years, but one of the biggest ones is really to focus on less capital-intensive manufacturing. And what do I mean by that? Well, when we first went to China, we would look for customers to work with that we're like, okay, we'll buy the machine, we'll set up almost a small focus factory for you within our factory to run these parts. But in the last 3 to 4 years, there's been so much excess capacity outside of our facility, just throughout China in general, that rather than buying a new CNC machine, or rather than upgrading our press to 200 tons from 150 tons, it's much more cost effective to go out and outsource a component of what you're doing. So we might outsource part of the stamping, but bring those components back in, weld it, send it out again for powder coating and e-coat it, bring it back in, we package it ourselves, then we ship it out, rather than buying that equipment when I know a guy 6 doors down has a press that's only running 20 hours a week. Why would I buy a press that's going to run about the same to start out with and then have to worry about selling it? So we've been really focusing on less capital intensive equipment. We've even divested ourselves of some of our more expensive to run equipment and used outside sources and to replace that, and then focused really on where we make money, which is stamping and welding and assembling versus CNC machining and things of that nature. Besides that, we're also more work done outside in terms of painting and not so much packaging, but painting and powder coating are two of the big ones. Every once in a while, if we have a job that requires some extra welding, we might bring in a temporary welder versus hire someone for basically forever to a certain degree, and we're just managing that a lot more closely. The second thing we've done, and this has really been in the last year, is switching quoting and even current parts that we do over from just all-inclusive door-to-door quoting to we quote FOB China, and then we also include a quote for shipping, so the customer sees exactly what the shipping cost. Because it's not really a profit center for us, but what we were finding is that when you quote something for, say 1,000 pieces and you include that in your price, well, then they said, well, that's great, we want 500. Well, the shipping was eating up such a large component on those lower volumes that, and to go back, again, it's after you've just quoted a job and say, well, I'm going to have to raise your price immediately, it's just not good business. So what we do is, here's the estimated shipping based on what you've told us the volumes are going to be, and we can break it up any way you want to. If you want us to ship one at a time, we'll do that, and it'll be real expensive. Or if you want to ship it, once a year, there are other costs associated with that. But and so being transparent with our customers, pretty much, I think every single part that we make now, I'm almost positive, is now something that we do it that way versus a year ago when probably only 10% of our parts were quoted in that fashion. Again, we focus. It might sound weird, but because labor is more expensive, we focus on work that has more value-added content for us. And basically, if you think about what it used to be, is that if something sells for $1, we might have 10 cents labor in it, but the labor was so cheap over there that we were able to still get the work. Well, that's no longer the case. What we focus on now is stuff that might have 40 cents or 50 cents worth of labor in it. That way, and also take longer too. So instead of something that takes us 15 minutes to make one part, for example, I like the stuff that takes me an hour, because an hour of Chinese labor is still a lot cheaper than an hour of U.S. labor, but that extra value add in there is what really makes it worthwhile for me doing. The things that just fly off the machine, $1,000 an hour, by the time you divide that by U.S. wages, it doesn't make any sense anymore. And we're seeing in our U.S. business some of those things starting to come back. We're also quoting more work with both U.S. and China content. To some customers, that means some parts will come from our U.S. facility, some will come from our Chinese facility, and they'll either meet at our place and then we'll send it on together, or they'll actually be shipped completely separately and to the customer. Other things, that means that we quote it from 2 different places and tell the customer, hey, it's 10% cheaper from China, but I can get it to you in 2 weeks from the U.S., and I can get it to you in 8 weeks from China. You make the decision, and when you first talk to a lot of people, it's like, oh, it's going to be price, but when it comes down to, hey, I need more of those, all of a sudden it's the U.S. more and more, and I think that's going to be a continuing trend. And then finally, there's 1 or 2 things where we've actually just brought it back from China. It just doesn't make sense to do anymore. Every part's different, but generally speaking, it seems to be the ones that are not very high volume or that have a quick turnaround requirement. And when someone needs something quickly and they have a customer that needs that part, and they're selling it at a markup, it just doesn't make sense to look at air freighting something. It makes sense to doing it here in the States. So those are kind of the ways we're looking at moving forward. One I did not put on here because it's not really something we're looking at doing in the future, but something we already did is this is our joint venture. We moved the facility from Shanghai to Wuhan in central China about 2.5 years ago. So it's a little bit older, but it's still something that I think a lot of companies are experiencing looking into, is moving stuff into the interior. As it happened, we already had a facility there, and it was easy to move some of our front office stuff from Shanghai, engineering and logistics, to Wuhan, and that saved me quite a bit of money. We're going to move on here to our second question, and I think the poll should be coming up here in just a second, but what % of China's population is covered by its one-child policy? And this is more of a fun fact than anything else. It doesn't have directly to do with what we've been talking about, but I ran across this last week, and I was very surprised. So I hope that you guys are too. We'll go ahead and launch the poll here and give everyone online a couple seconds to go ahead and vote. How many do we have voting?
Yeah. I got percentages, I don't have a number.
Oh, there you go. All right, we'll give everyone about 5 more seconds to get their votes in online, and then we'll go ahead and display them. All right. Go ahead and close it. Does it show the poll results?
No, is there the result? Show result. I'll do share.
Share, there we go. All right, the correct answer, and it doesn't look like anyone got it right, is actually 36%. That was very surprising to me, but then I looked back at one of our earlier presentations, and that actually makes sense because China's population policy only covers urban residents. That means you have an urban haiku, I do believe it's pronounced. But basically, what that means is that you have hundreds of millions of people living in cities that aren't registered in cities. Therefore, they are allowed to have 2 children because they are still registered in their home villages and in rural areas, technically rural areas. And it's just a fascinating fun fact. It's also resulted in, even just this 36% has resulted in 400 fewer people being born.
400 million.
400 million, I'm sorry, 400 million, yeah. So if for those of you that have been to China, imagine 400 million more people. It might be good for the architects of the world, but everyone else, it'd be a little crowded. With that, it kind of concludes our initial presentation here. We're going to start with taking questions from the audience and then from online as well. So, Tom?
So, first off, we'll start here in the audience. Is there anybody here who'd like to start with any questions you might have right now? Go ahead. And please, guys on the panel, if you will, so that the folks at the webinar can hear, repeat the question after you're asked, if you will, to make sure everybody can hear it. Go ahead.
So my question is, you do sell part of your production in China as well? Trying to sell into the Chinese market?
For Long-Stanton, we do. Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, do we sell any of our products in the Chinese market? And for Long-Stanton, the answer is yes, but it's a small percentage, probably less than 10%. 5 years ago, it was the other way around. 90% of it was sold there. But we found that for our niche and what we do well, it's the export is a much better option. To be honest, metal manufacturing, it's kind of once you have the same equipment and once you have the know-how and you can produce a quality part, it all comes down to how much you're going to price that at and how much money you want to make versus not make. And competition in China is very fierce, and the quality has gotten much better. So for selling stuff locally, it's pretty fierce. However, for export, when customers need certain things and we can understand what they need, we found that we do much better there. So that's for us. Herm?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty fair statement. We've had a couple of isolated incidents where we've sold product, but that's in China. But that's generally been customer that's based in North America or sometimes in Europe, and they have a manufacturer or subcontractor in China. So we already have the established design, the established contacts, and then we're selling it to maybe their subcontractor or their supplier to build additional components. But it's not for us, and I don't see it being a big deal. In China, not unlike here, companies have suppliers they're comfortable with, they're familiar in working with, maybe are very close to them in physical proximity. So it's just not been a good market for us to try to sell. There's just not enough differentiation there. So price driven and loyalty driven between companies in China. It's not a market for us either.
Anybody else here? I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
They're building in China. I thought that was given there. I want to ask a couple questions that came in during the presentation. This one came in when you were talking, Matthew. What issues have you seen with hiring architects or other professionals in China?
Issues that we've had in hiring? Well, similar to our U.S. staff, our staff in Beijing is very international. We have probably about 30%, 40% of our staff are not Chinese trained. And so our challenges that we have are the recruitment of an international company is one, attractive to a Chinese national. They like to have that on their resume and like to experience the opportunities. They know that when we interview, we share that as somebody moves up through our company, there's opportunities to come to the United States and to have time in the United States to work in our offices, so that becomes attractive. From the international side, architects that are looking for jobs are also looking for other international companies that can give them a diverse experience as well. But the biggest challenge that we have comes around that because it is such a new market, retaining staff becomes a different challenge, particularly for the young. We just had our year end. The average age in our Beijing office is 28 years old compared to, say, Cincinnati, which probably puts it almost at 40. And so you have a very young, energetic staff. Not unlike the Generation Ys that we have here, their opportunities are always there, and so to keep the staff engaged and keep them excited about working is a big challenge. So retention is probably one of our biggest challenges.
Okay. And another question, since you're on the roll now, Matthew. Okay. And I'm not an architect still, but are Chinese companies concerned with LEED, L-E-E-D, certified buildings and developments?
They are. There's actually a separate system in China. The Chinese, in many ways, are ahead of the United States in regards to thinking environmentally about the buildings. All of the hospitals that we do a tremendous amount of work in regards to the way we manage water, how we're handling air quality, what we're doing in regards to the quality of the environment, how we handle mechanical, the use of alternative energies, whether it's geothermal or solar. It's a demand need that they have, and generally are much more attuned to it than we find, say, certainly like in the Midwest.
Anything else here before I go ahead, please.
Question for Matthew. Matthew, your development client base, are they international companies?
So the question is are the developer clients that we're working with internationally based or Chinese based? And I believe every one of our clients are Chinese companies. And if we have one that's not, it would be a small client. The large clients that we're working with are national based. Some of them are large enough now that they're actually on world exchanges so that you can buy their stock. But they are companies that are based in China. And in the housing market particularly, because they're doing their land leases and they're buying land for 70 years, the connection to the Chinese government is still relevant. And so that, I think, drives a higher opportunity for Chinese companies. The commercial market becomes a little bit different, but we're still seeing that even the clients that we're working with are essentially Chinese-based companies.
To follow that up, there seems to be a trend for the medical schools in the United States to look together with hospitals in China. And has that
Let me phrase the question again, see if I understand it right. What's the impact of the Chinese coming to the United States and being trained through our educational universities here?
No.
Okay.
Very different. There seems to be more and more medical or partner. So I would appreciate this trend. There will be a lot of new facilities.
Okay. So is the partnering of U.S. universities, medical institutions with Chinese institutions made any types of changes to their awareness of technologies and other medical trends? Okay. It reflects. The demand is kind of driven by the population shifts and the need for medical facilities. But I can say that the facilities that we designed, technology is right at the same level and even in some ways above what we do in the United States because the government is driven to put the best into these facilities that they possibly can. And so from a technologically side, we see they're very, very competitive to what's going on in the United States. There are some differences. And initially we thought, we went in thinking that we were going to show the Chinese how to design hospitals, and I can say that we've learned a great deal and have brought it back to the United States to say there's some things happening in China that we should be aware of in regards to patient care, in regards to how the facility supports healing at a faster rate. Things. So we actually see that it's not a one-way in regards to the learning that's going on and what we bring back, and we do share it on a regular basis with our U.S. clients in regards to what we're seeing and experiencing in China, and they look at how it might be relevant to what they're doing as well.
I want to circle back a second. The first question had to do with hiring of architects or other professionals in China. Pei, I wondered, is Frost Brown Todd hiring attorneys in China, or are they doing any of that over there, or is that just a U.S.-based effort for Frost Brown Todd?
Well, as of now, I think we do not hire anyone in China. Well, I'm the only Chinese-speaking attorney in Frost Brown Todd, but I was educated here for the law school.
Okay, very good. This next one came in when Herm was speaking, but I'll probably ask maybe anybody on the panel, and it's, are you expanding the question was manufacturing, but I guess are you expanding your operations in China currently?
Are we expanding?
Yeah.
In terms of expanding capacity, we're not so much expanding capacity, but we are looking at alternate locations, moving away from the coastal regions. We share a facility there, so there has been some growth in other areas. Not all of the facilities dedicated to transformers. We do some circuit boards and some other things there. For us, it's more been a situation of being prepared for shifts in location more than strictly an expansion. So we are looking more to the interior to try to take advantage of the cost differential. At this point, our workforce is probably a little bit different than, say, Long-Stanton's. We're able to take advantage of, because of the way transformers are built, overall a lower skill base. So we haven't seen quite as much upward pressure on wages for kind of the assembly group. It's certainly there with the higher skilled labor. There's less of it. It's just not different than it is here in the United States. So for us, it's more of a geographical shift than strictly an expansion at this point.
Yeah, and for us at Long-Stanton, we wouldn't move. Our Chinese facility in Changzhou is almost entirely staffed by local needs or local Chinese, and so to move that I wouldn't do it. It's not worth the time and the hassle. It would basically be like completely taking apart the company and reassembling it someplace else with totally different staff. We hired local people on purpose, and we have very low turnover rate. Normally it's less than 5%. So That's what we were going for, but that strategy kind of locked us into Changzhou for the long term. In terms of growing it, I would say that basically any extra capacity that we would need, at least right now, is readily available in terms of equipment and machinery. You might need to hire 1 or 2 more people to do things like packaging or anything else like that, but I wouldn't see any kind of major need for an expansion facility or anything like that. There's just so much excess capacity available that it would be a wasted investment.
And then, I guess somewhat related to what you guys were talking about, what risks do you see of Chinese suppliers bypassing you and becoming a direct competitor?
Well, for us, I mean, that's obviously a major concern if you're doing business in China, because you're not on the ground. You have established relationships, but it's something that we've dealt with fairly much for the history of the company. We like to think that we bring some technological innovation to the product we produce, but in reality, it's relationship based. And once your customers come to trust you, trust that you're going to bring them a good value in the product, that you're going to give them a quality product, that you're going to meet your deliveries, that's really where the loyalty is built. And the same with the companies that you work with in China. People are largely the same, I think, all over the world at different levels, obviously. But for us, it's been careful selection of the people we work with and the companies we work with. That threat's always out there, but I don't think it's any worse for us in China than it is here in the States.
Yeah, for us, it's more or less the same thing. We have had very little experience of that happening. We keep our U.S. side and our Chinese side completely separate in terms of, our Chinese suppliers don't know who the end customer is, and we keep it that way as much as possible. So from our Changzhou facility, I don't really see much danger of that. However, we have within our joint venture in Wuhan, there's a sourcing group, and they have had a few issues in the past where we would have, for example, a casting supplier in Ningbo will call up to our customer in the States and be like, hey, I can make that part you've been buying, cheaper if you just deal with me directly. A few times when we've worked with customers as well that are trying to sell stuff into China, trying to find customers for them, that's been something where they're like, oh, well, we would like to work with you directly and not work through Long-Stanton. That's one of the problems selling into China, really, is it's relationship driven, but your customer or your possible customer in China wants to have a relationship with the person actually making it. So if you're kind of a middleman, as it were, or a relationship connector, it's very easy to get cut out. So.
And then during the valuation discussion, a couple of things came across, and one came a little later, which was probably more for you, Matt. How do changes in exchange rate affect service companies doing business in China?
Well, it doesn't vary too much because of the work that, in regards to affect us, because the work that we're doing in China and the revenue that we generate in China is staying in China. That's carrying our company. We do know that by the basic currency exchange that our fees that we receive in China are now technically greater in U.S. dollars than they were a couple years ago. But most of our revenue stays in China and works within that area. So we're not greatly affected by that.
Okay. And then, Herm, you opened yourself up for this one, but do you think China is manipulating its currency? It was asked.
Well, I mean, I think it's always hard to know to what extent when you have a largely still a closed economy. There are mixed thoughts there as to whether they're undervaluing it, overvaluing it, manipulating it. I think probably for a period of time, particularly when it was locked to the dollar, it was undervalued to some extent, but at the same time, that was really necessary for China to grow its economy and its export economy, because as they were moving from a rural to an industrialized economy, and they didn't always have the skill sets and so forth to be as productive as maybe some Western counterparts, having a low wage rate was necessary and a favorable exchange rate to get things going. So today, do I think it's being adversely manipulated? No, I don't think so. I think it's probably fairly weighted at this point in time.
Okay. Before go ahead,
just
Pei,
wanted to
please.
add, the Chinese premium Wenjiabao just delivered the government report yesterday, and I remember one of the highlights in the report is that the China will keep the current exchange currency rate pretty stable for the next year. So what it is interpreted to say that mean that the current exchange rate will remain the same or about the same.
Mm-hmm. And then there's two more here. Before I ask them, is there anything else here? First, the audience here. Go ahead.
Herman mentioned that if learned some best practices, shall we say, from China, some things from China. Have you two learned anything from the Chinese brought them back to America?
The question was whether or not we've learned anything from Chinese suppliers and brought that back to America. That's a very broad question. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Not necessarily in terms of, let me think. A few process things that I can think of, how things are done. People think differently in different parts of the world. And a few small process things, they do it this way, and hey, that's not a bad idea. Not so much from suppliers, to be perfectly honest, though, from my employees. And that's just they've worked in other places as well, and they're like, hey, we're going to do it this way. And at first you're like, no, that's not how we do it. But managing over there, you have to give quite a bit of leeway to people that are used to doing a certain way, and make sure that way actually is worse, and not just assume that it is. And I've certainly learned in time that they're right probably more often than I am, certainly. As far as from suppliers, I can't think of anything specifically, but I'm sure I've learned something from them.
One of the interesting things from our standpoint is the equipment availability. Very often the latest, newest, best equipment is actually available in China. Our industry has been fairly static and under a lot of pressure for many years. So the supply base of equipment manufacturers in North America has dwindled. They haven't had a lot of money to invest in totally new designs. In China, as they've moved forward, they had a starting point of where we were 20, 30, 40 years ago, and they had the opportunity then to kind of do a clean sheet of paper approach to it. So in terms of equipment to wind coils, some of the equipment maybe to weld or fabricate, in different areas they've actually surpassed what's available here in the United States. In other areas, not so much. It depends on, I would say particularly for us, for the coil winding equipment that's manufactured in Taiwan and China is, I think, the best in the world at this point. It's the most efficient, the easiest to use, the most cost effective. In some of the other areas, partly because labor has been relatively cheap and remains relatively cheap, we haven't seen the advancement. I think we still have better methods and materials here, but in winding the coil, that's really a key to the quality, and so they've been very progressive in the design and taken advantage of the latest techniques and computer control, and that's, so we have learned, and we've actually brought equipment back from China and put in place here because it's simply better than what's available in North America, and very often cheaper. Yeah, no question. Not only is it cheaper, but what we could buy here that might cost 2 or 3 times as much, it isn't as good. So we've definitely learned.
I have a question. I know over the past, 10, 15, 20 years, U.S. companies going to China mostly focus on product, parts, manufacturing in China and going back to the U.S. And over the past 2 to 3 years, I've talked to some people who have been there for a long time, and it seems like there might be, just like the foreign investment, it seems like there might be another trend reversing that. A lot of Chinese companies are thinking about sourcing in the U.S. for durable parts, advanced technologies, especially right now in automotive, and I have a friend who is doing a lot of sourcing like that. They used to do that in Germany, but now they're doing it in the U.S. What do you guys thinking about this trend reversing, and how, especially the Midwest, how do we get prepared, and how do we meet the challenge and opportunity as well?
Well, actually, we just
let-
have.
repeat the question.
The question is, well, it's a long question. Is that the question is, whether there's a trend, or do you see if there's a trend of reversing foreign investment from China to the U.S. for manufacturing or whatever it is, for like better quality, more advanced technology. And I would say that yes, there is a trend, and actually we just have a client that is a Shandong, like a company from Shandong province, and they wanted to actually manufacture coal mining equipment in the States because their intent is if the product is manufactured in the U.S. is branded here, it will have better sales in China because of the quality, or maybe not because of the quality, because it is made in the U.S. So I mean, definitely there's a trend, and because of more like merger and acquisition, reverse merger and acquisition happening from normally in the past it was like U.S. company will acquire Chinese companies, but now the trend is more and more Chinese companies, especially state-owned enterprises, they will actually buy the U.S. companies. So because of this kind of merger and acquisitions, the trend you are just talking about, yeah, it is there. It's happening.
So how does the Midwest get prepared? Because from talking to some small, let's say, we got a request from Chinese company who want a special part from one special U.S. company in the Midwest, for example, automotive. And when we talk to the automotive company, they're not really ready. They don't, usually they don't do export to China. So how, from our standpoint of view, of course, maybe in more association level or government level, but how do we get ready from your perspective?
Well, my initial thought is for a lot of Chinese business owners, they still don't understand, or they don't know where the Midwest is in the United States. I mean, their impression about the United States is still the East Coast and the West Coast. So, if they want to open up a manufacturing facility in the U.S., they will think about like having a subsidiary or manufacturing facility in the areas that they think is United States, and they just don't have an idea where like Cincinnati is, or where Kentucky is, or where Ohio is. And so I think the most important part is to educate them, or to try to let them know that we are here, and there are a lot of advantages of if you are serious about having a facility in the United States. Actually, the Midwest, this location is better for your company, and because they just don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a very good answer. I think a lot of our guys in Ohio, in Changzhou, if I was to ask them where Ohio was on a map, they know it's someplace not too far from Chicago, but that's about it. Outside of one or two guys there, I'd say that's the case. So certainly, marketing from an association or state level, marketing the Midwest in general would probably be a pretty good way to do that. And as for your first question, we supply a lot of companies with components. We sell very few fully formed products ourselves, but we sell a lot of components to a wide variety of industries. And I can think of several examples of companies that are starting to sell equipment. It's being sourced basically from Chinese companies that are sourcing equipment in the U.S. For a wide variety of reasons, and some of them I don't know, but that certainly is happening more so than 4 or 5 years ago. I can think of 5 or 6 people in the tri-state alone.
I would just add that I think that in order for any foreign company to know more about this region needs to become more aware of what's going on in the other countries, to know what they can actually sell and to approach it more proactively. Because your presence is only going to be brought by yourself. And so, for a company that may have a product that could be sold in China, they're going to have to go there. They're going to have to learn and understand how their product can be sold and how they can approach it and take advantage of it. And I think that this region, as a whole, we need to think more globally. And when we start to think more globally, the opportunities are going to come here more actively than they do today.
Yeah, exactly. Things like sister city programs and things of that nature, not just for example, Cincinnati, but for surrounding areas. Those type of connections are where you kind of start to educate people. So.
Okay. I think that's what we've got. That's all here. Marvin, I don't know if you've got anything. Closing?
No, just I want to thank everyone for attending. We're only 5 minutes over, so that's something. Thank you very much. And we will have the presentation online later today and the recording probably in a week or a little bit more than that. If you have any further questions for our participants, please feel free to email and contact us. Have a great day.
Thank you.